XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/XSWD.
The new Super 35 sensor that Canon have introduced with the C300 Mark III is quite a big step up from other S35 sensors that they have created before. From the body and the flexibility that gives us in terms of the expansion packs and the interchangeable mount, to the sensor with its increased dynamic range for tackling scenes that possibly we couldn't have tackled or captured faithfully before, I can get more out of this camera. My money goes further. It's as simple as that from a business standpoint. From a creative point of view, it's unquestionably unlocking more creative avenues for us as filmmakers.
Hello everyone, welcome to ProAV Live and welcome to our weekly little informal Q&A session where we just go over the week of camera releases, the week of industry news and just what's been happening here at ProAV, and I answer anything that you really want us to talk about. So leave questions and topics and things that you're thinking about down in the YouTube chat or in the Facebook comments, and I can see it all here, and we will use that to dictate what we're going to be talking about over the next half an hour to an hour. So the main thing that has happened this week is the Blackmagic announcements, which have been a huge deal for the industry. They announced a whole bunch of products in a live stream, and some of their most requested products as well, which is always great to see. So the main two releases are the new Pocket 6K Pro. So you can see that here in the ProAV latest on the right. So here we go, this one. So this is a new Pocket Cinema camera. It's based very much on the 6K that's been on the market for about a year and a half now. And it is essentially the same camera, the same sensor, the same image quality, all the rest of it, and a very similar body design, but with a few ergonomic tweaks, which really will make a huge, huge difference. If you haven't seen the video that we made, I really do recommend going back and watching this up to speed video. Where I literally just go over the announcement, I go over what's new. One thing I did miss though when I was making that video is that hidden away in the spec sheets for the new cameras is that this new 6K Pro can actually do 4K DCI in Blackmagic RAW, which is something that you could actually never do on the original 6K. And as far as I can tell, that is the only image quality difference. So I'm very intrigued as to why that is the case, because I thought processing wise, image quality wise, it was all the same camera. So I'm very curious to see why that is. Video editor bloke, definitely a better watch than the COVID statement in Parliament right now. Thank you for joining me, Video Editor Bloke, and thank you for joining me, Marshall, as well from Canada. You two both watch very regularly. It's great to see the same names coming back again for these. So that on the 6K, I'm really looking forward to getting our hands on that, because it is Blackmagic's RAW format, and as far as I'm aware, it's the same image processing pipeline as you get in the 6K. I mean, yes, since then they've come out with the 12K RAW, but that's very different. It's a very different camera. It's built on a different sensor. It's built on a different system, and it's actually built on a sensor which works very differently from any of the other sensors on the market. It's not a CMOS sensor with a De Beer pattern. It's an RGB sensor, and so it works in just, I think the end result is very similar, but it works from a camera point of view in a completely different way, hence why it can do things which some other cameras can't. The 6K isn't like that. The 6K Pocket is a regular CMOS sensor. It's the same sensor that was in the original one. So why now on this one it can enable DCI Blackmagic RAW, and whether or not that's cropped in or whether it's full frame or not, or full frame, it's Super 35, but whether it's using the full width of the sensor, I'm not sure, and I'm very curious to try that out. So as soon as we can, I will be getting our hands on that camera. Hopefully it will be this week at some point. Blackmagic do say that all of this stuff is in stock with them, but we're hoping to hear by the end of day today as to numbers and stock movements and all the rest of it. The sales team are talking to Blackmagic as we speak. So if you've got a pre-order on with us for a Pocket 6K Pro, keep in touch with the sales team, and tomorrow they might be able to give you a bit more information as to how long we can be expecting. Paul is asking, do you see any reason why Blackmagic didn't choose to go with a box-shaped camera? It's a really interesting point. Let's chat about that in more detail in a bit, actually. I've just read that. Let's just go over what the announcements were first, and then let's talk about that, because that is a really, really interesting point. They're doing some very different things, and a very interesting move from a lot of other cinema camera manufacturers. So yeah, that's the main image quality difference, is that it enables 4K RAW in DCI, 4K RAW in Blackmagic RAW. Apart from that, it's the same camera, but with ergonomic tweaks. So we now have built-in NDs, and we now have this optional ProAV attachment here, which is going to transform the camera. I'm so excited to try this out. I really hope it's going to be good. It sits on top of the camera like that. And so it really should make the camera much more mirrorless style ergonomic, where you can hold it up to your face and push it against your face so that you can block out all external light. You can really judge your exposure, really get a good sense of the framing and get engrossed in the image like you can with an EVF rather than a LCD screen on the back. Plus, of course, you're pushing it against your face for that extra point of contact to just make handheld work like that a little bit more steady. Sure, it's not going to be as steady as putting on a shoulder rig or having stabilization like IBIS, but it definitely helps. And so that is one of the accessories I'm most looking forward to. There's also a battery grip. So this battery grip, can't aim with a mouse today. This battery grip, which lets you get up to 3 batteries inside the camera. So 1 inside the camera and 2 in this grip, because it now doesn't have the dummy battery bit. So that will really expand your battery life, plus allow you to hot swap some out. And then apart from that, it's got an extra XLR input. So it's got 2 XLR inputs going into it on the side, mini XLRs. So just like the C70 now uses. So it's a much more well-rounded and complete camera. Oh, sorry, the other major thing that I just forgot to list there is that the actual LCD screen on the back tilts. So there was actually mods from Tilter and people like that to make this happen on the original Pocket cameras, because it was a lovely 5-inch screen and a beautiful touchscreen with one of the best touchscreen menus I've ever used. It's brilliant, a really handy way to use the camera, but it was just fixed there on the back. So it was really awkward. It was awkward when you were holding it out in front of you. It was awkward when it was on your shoulder. It was awkward when it was built into a rig. And if you wanted to put any sort of loop or anything like that to isolate it down, you couldn't use the touchscreen. Plus it was too big really to do that with effectively. So it is a very awkward design when it's attached onto the back like it is on the normal Pockets. Simply letting it be able to tilt like this just makes it so much more usable, in my opinion. You can use high ups, you can do low downs, plus if you've got it in a rig, you can have it tilted out like this so that you just allow yourself, say you've got 15mm rods and you've got the camera and then a gap and then your battery, rather than having to sort of reach in between and then peer in to guess where the touchscreen controls are, you can tilt it out so that you've almost got like this up-facing 5-inch touch display on the back of your rig. It's just going to make it so much easier to both see that 5-inch monitor and touch it for control. So that is probably one of the biggest adjustments. Well, it's hard to tell what's the biggest adjustment. I mean, they're all fairly big ergonomic changes to the Pocket 6K. And so since the release of this camera, I've seen 2 schools of thought in the comments. One, this is fantastic, which I think is my opinion of it. This transforms the camera. It makes the camera much more usable and a camera to be taken seriously. Whereas the 6K was always the best way to get best bang for buck. You know, incredible value for money, incredible image quality for the amount of money that you've spent on that camera. And that's still the case with this, because the price isn't actually that different. But it was always frustrating to use. And there will be things about this that will still be frustrating, I'm sure. But it seems like a much more well-rounded ergonomic package, which is just fantastic to see. So I really think this has transformed the camera into something which is much more desirable to work with day in, day out. And then there's the school of thought that says, well, it's the same camera. Why would I upgrade to potentially the same camera with a few extra tweaks? Or why would I do that? Why wouldn't I just get the 4K or the 6K in order to save a bit of money? And that's fair enough. It's the same. Some people prioritize image quality above all else, and that's probably why they ended up with the Pocket cameras in the first place. And so, yeah, I appreciate this camera isn't for absolutely everyone out there. But I think the vast majority, from what I can tell, think that these are ergonomic differences that are going to make a huge difference to the day in, day out usability of the camera. So is there any questions I want to answer in there just for the moment? I will get to all of your questions. Don't worry. Yeah, loads of people saying the EVF is brilliant and exactly what the C70 or the FX6 needs. I couldn't not agree more. I want to see somebody make one of these in every single camera manufacturer. I want to see a C70 with one of these. I mean, the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II have it. They've got a little slot on the top where you can put on a accessory pretty much exactly like this. So let's Let's find the C300 Mark III. Whoops. C300 Mark III. So on the back of the camera up here, this thing comes off and lets you put on this, which is a EVF. I've got it in the essential extras. No, we will have it in the accessories as a modular review finder, I imagine. So module. So I'm really bad at talking while looking through and trying to concentrate on something like this. There we go. So it's the Canon V50. So they've made it for the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II. It's this sort of thing. It's actually quite a similar price to Blackmagic's ones. Looking at that, I hadn't quite noticed just how similar that was. It's much bigger than Blackmagic's ones, isn't it? Blackmagic's communicate through a little pin down here, whereas they're probably to make it a bit sturdier. So we know manufacturers value it, but Sony haven't released anything like that for the FX6 or the FX9. The FX9 has that viewfinder loop, but it's much better using a proper viewfinder like this. The other thing I really want to see them do is let you relocate it, because how good would this be? And I've seen a few people saying this in the YouTube comments. How good would this be if you could take this off and use a cable to relocate it wherever? So you could, sorry, let me make this picture bigger for you. You could have the camera there and then have an EVF arm and have it in the place of a traditional EVF. So for viewfinder mounts, all that sort of stuff, it would just be fantastic. And yet they're not doing that yet. And so I would love to see that. That I think is the next big step. First next step is to get this sort of thing on every camera. Then the next step after that is to let you relocate that to wherever. I mean, that is just going to be transformative for these sorts of small cameras. So yeah, enough about the pockets. The next main thing, there we go, there's the banner for it. The main thing that they announced was some live streaming equipment. So they announced the ATEM Mini Extreme. So this is essentially their ATEM Mini Pro and the ATEM Mini Pro ISO, because there's an ISO version of this as well, but double the size and more than double the capabilities. So rather than 4 HDMI inputs, it has 8 HDMI inputs. It's got multiple outputs and USB outputs for connecting multiple things at once, so you can have both the storage and the computer connected over USB, for example. It's got lots more functionality in terms of mixer functionality in there. It's got a so that row of buttons right there at the top is a select bus, so that you can control what's on your DVEs and your ME bays through that. It's got 6 macro shortcuts built into it for macro engine. It's got 4 upstream keyers and 2 downstream keyers. It's got super source, so that you can combine up to 4 different inputs plus graphics and everything like that on one screen to use as like an ME bay. There's all sorts of functionality in this. It punches so far above its price point in terms of mixers. You know, that's the sort of capabilities that we see on mixers that cost 10 to 20 grand. This thing costs £770 or £769 ex VAT, which is ridiculously priced, and this is such good value for money, as we've seen with the ATEM Mini line for years now. They announced that, and then they announced the Web Presenter, which is this, the Web Presenter HD. So the Web Presenter has been one of their most popular streaming products for ages, and the Web Presenter did a very simple job. It took an HDMI input, turned it into a webcam source to trick your camera into thinking that your HDMI input was a webcam. So rather than just a simple HDMI to USB-C adapter, for example, like we see from Atomos and Elgato and a bunch of other brands, and Blackmagic themselves have got the Ultra Studio ones, they just give you an HDMI input to your computer and give you a full-size, no compression HDMI source to access. And that's great for some applications, but for others you need to trick it into a webcam. So that's what the original, that makes it much easier for things like Skype and stuff like that. It gives you variable bit rates as well. It lowers the quality, but it makes it much more practical. So that's what the original Web Presenter did. With Web Presenter HD, they've taken things and gone in a little bit of a different direction. They've made it an SDI only product because there's no HDMI input on the back anymore. I assume the mentality there is that the ATEMs already do a decent job of the HDMI workflows. We'll just get that rather than trying to shoehorn a HDMI workflow into this. This is for their SDI mixers. So if you've got an SDI mixer from Blackmagic or any other brand, you normally don't have built-in encoders or streaming engines. And so you take an SDI program out, you plug it into this. This will encode your footage for you, and it can trick your computer into thinking it's a webcam to give you up to 1080p this time rather than 720p on the old one, a variable bitrate webcam source. Or you can use it as a normal streaming encoder, point it at your destination, and do a RTMP feed up to whatever platform you need, which is how we're doing this now. We're not using the Web Presenter, but that's the streaming method that we're doing this now with. And so that is a very capable device if you're using an SDI workflow. That could be a really good endpoint encoder. It does give you a few extra functionalities as well. It has a screen on the front of it to give you control and to see when it's on air, and then control over the menus. Plus it's got a back end so that if you plug in HDMI or SDI into it for a monitor for it, you actually get a full status feed with all sorts of information on it, even down to the particular whether each bit is coming through properly in a 10-bit signal, so you can tell whether it's a 10-bit or an 8-bit signal, for example. Lots of really useful tools with that. Video editor bloke is saying it's a shame they lost the ability to switch between two sources with the Web Presenter, but great to see it updated to output 1080p. That's part of what they've done, is sort of configuring it. Since they brought out that Web Presenter, they've brought out the ATEM Mini line. So with the ATEM Mini line, particularly the ATEM Mini Pro, you really don't need that original Web Presenter. It does a better job. An ATEM Mini Pro will do a better job than the original Web Presenter did for most HDMI workflows. So they've basically redone it. As you've just put, I guess they'd argue the basic ATEM Mini would fill that old role, but at a higher res. That is exactly the way that they argue it. And I think for most part, they're right. I don't really see why they couldn't just add at least one HDMI input onto the back of the new Web Presenter. If we look at the back, why make it only an SDI workflow and not give you at least the option to put one HDMI in? Because then people could have paired it with the original ATEM Mini, so they could have scaled it. This could be your encoder no matter what you were using before it, and then you could use either an ATEM Mini or an SDI one. You could just basically go to any job, and whatever is turning up from your whatever mixer you're given to work with, effectively, you'll be able to connect this in as your endpoint encoder. So that is absolutely worthwhile doing. And I don't know why they didn't just put at least one HDMI input on here to enable you to do that. But apart from that, I think this looks like a really fantastic product. What I really love about it as well is the redundant power. So you can see there's two power supplies here on the left. There's the big 3-pin one and then a 4-pin XLR one. So one is AC and one is DC, so that you can plug the AC one into mains, and then you can plug the DC one into a battery, and it just needs 12 volts of power. So a V-Lock battery, for example, would be able to do that. And then you've got a battery, effectively a UPS for your encoder. So if you're pairing this with a laptop and maybe a tethered phone connection for 3G, if you lose power and you've got all your cameras with batteries in them, say the entire building loses power, you can keep your stream going, but run it all off of battery power, which is pretty cool. So that is it for the Blackmagic announcements. A huge amount of news. And of course, we've also got Sony's announcement tomorrow at 3 o'clock of a new product in their alpha lineup. So there is a lot going on at the moment with new cameras, not to mention all of the ridiculous amount of cameras that was announced in 2020. And even this year so far, we've had a bunch of others. Video editor bloke on that Web Presenter point is just saying, it is worth mentioning you can now easily tether to a mobile. It seems like a really good backup. Yes, that is a really cool feature. However, I really would hesitate to recommend people relying on one singular cellular connection to do a proper live stream. If it's a very casual live stream and it really doesn't matter what happens to it, then that's okay. If it's for a professional one, for a client, you really should be looking at some sort of bonded solution, whether that's Teradek or LiveView, or one of the others, in order to combine multiple sources together. One, it gives you better signal strength so you can pump more data out there, but also it gives you redundancy so that if any one of them has any problems, you don't completely and utterly lose your connection. That is well worth doing. And so obviously connecting a phone to it, like Blackmagic showed in their live stream, would only be one singular cellular connection. So I do worry a little bit about that. Okay, let's go through and chat about some questions. So the one that I went back on and said, let's talk about that later, it's probably only fair that we talk about that one, was why didn't Blackmagic go with a box style camera for this rather than keep with the pocket camera? Now, this is a really interesting point because most people making these small cinema cameras, so if you look at what Red are doing with the Komodo, if you look at what Panasonic did with the BGH1, Canon did it back in the day with the ME200, if anyone remembers that camera, and the low light beast, the ME20. What Zcam are doing, Kinefinity are doing. Let's bring up a Kine so that you can see what I'm talking about. Kinefinity Terra. Terra 4K. So this is the Kinefinity Terra 4K, which is actually a very similar sort of size and weight to a pocket camera, but it's this cube. So if I scroll through these, have we got any of somebody actually holding them? That's it all rigged up, obviously. But yeah, it's not big. You can absolutely put it in the palm of the hand. But what a box camera like this lets you do is very easily change it from being that to being that, and rigging it up as much as you want. And then now with it as a box camera, all of the controls are on the side or on the top if it's something like the Red Komodo. And you can put your monitors wherever. It's a much more modular way of doing it. What Blackmagic have done with this is sort of almost try to replicate a mirrorless camera. I mean, this is it sort of looks like a cross between a DSLR and a mirrorless camera, even more so now that it has a flippy screen and an EVF attachment on the top. And yet it's got two XLR inputs, it's got built-in NDs, it's got Blackmagic RAW capabilities plus high resolutions, you know, and it's ProRes recording. This is a cinema camera, and yet it's designed to be built like a mirrorless camera. Now, I do wish that Blackmagic offered a box camera, because for a lot of people, myself included, that would be a much better ergonomic style than this one. However, I am very, very pleased that they are doing something a little different. I do like having that form factor. I love working with mirrorless cameras. In fact, I've got an A7S Mark III here behind me. So A7S Mark III with this one's a tilt out to one side screen, but that sort of style camera, I love how small they are. I love how low weight they are. I love using an EVF up to my eye like that to shoot video, particularly for events, anything where you don't want to be noticed. So there is a lot to be said for this form factor, and I like that people... I mean, the A7S Mark III is probably the most video-orientated mirrorless camera that we've seen to date, and yet even this is still a mirrorless camera. It's still built like a stills camera with all the stills camera controls on it. Still built around autofocus for stills. It's, you know, it doesn't have tally lights. It doesn't have record buttons on here. But the biggest thing is it doesn't have built-in NDs, and it doesn't have XLRs. You can add XLRs with attachments there, but it's nowhere near as ready whenever you are as the pocket cameras are for that sort of thing, this new pocket camera anyway. And so I do love the idea of a true video camera in this sort of form factor. And so I am very, very happy that the pocket cameras are taking that route. I just wish that Blackmagic had this camera as their pocket camera and then something above it. in between this and the 12K, I wish they had a box-shaped system, something like the Kinneys and the Komodos of this world, to be that modular system. Potentially something with the same sort of sensor as the Ursa Mini Pro, the new 12K sensor. That would be brilliant. And Eugene has just put a very good point there at the end. Pro video exposure tools. That's the main thing now that I think that is missing from the 6K Pro. There's a couple of things missing. Obviously, there's no autofocus and there's no IBIS, the sort of the traditionally stills focused things, although they are both incredibly useful for video, don't get me wrong. But none of them are on true cinema cameras, if you like. The main thing that is missing is true exposure tools. So there's no waveform, which is the biggest thing. Is there false color? I can't remember off the top of my head whether there's false color. I think there's false color. Let me know in the comments if there is false color, because I'm pretty sure there is. But that's a bit of a saving grace. If you get to know how to use false color, that will get you out away from having to rely on there not being a waveform. If you're missing a waveform, just learn false color instead and try and use that instead. However, false color is absolutely something that should be in there, although they have now got RGB histogram on there. It's not as good as waveform or false color for video exposure, but it's better than just a Luma histogram. Marshall says that they do have false color in Zebras, which is good. Okay, so yeah, I would love to see a box-shaped camera, but I am very happy that they've taken this route just because it's something different on the market. We don't want to see a camera market where every single manufacturer is taking the exact same approach, because the main thing that I've learned from working for ProAV is that video creators and customers out there come in all different shapes and sizes. Everyone needs a different thing. Anyone that tells you one camera is the right tool for everyone out there is just purely lying to you. Everyone needs different things out there. So a world where each camera manufacturer is taking a slightly different approach is one that I am very, very okay with. Okay, Majid is asking what coverage there is for tomorrow for the FX3. We don't know what Sony are releasing tomorrow. We don't have a live stream ourselves booked in, but Sony do have a live stream at 3 o'clock to announce this new lineup. Where you've got the title FX3 from is from all the leaks out there that are on the Sony Alpha Rumors website. So if you haven't seen those rumors yet, anyone watching, head over to any of the rumor sites out there. They're full of stuff at the moment. Some of it true, some of it not true, I assume. That is always the way that these rumor sites go, is that some of it they get right, some of it they don't. We will see tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I don't have a live stream scheduled in for that, unfortunately, but we often release things on embargo on the channel, so keep an eye out there. And yeah, let's chat about it once we can. Okay, Marshall says, is there any media that can reliably, no drop frames, etc., record Blackmagic RAW in the Pocket 6K at 3:1 or Q0 and 60 frames a second? So this is a very Blackmagic thing. On the 12K and on the 6K, they have these formats in there which pretty much no media can really record. I thought that the 6K you could with the absolute fast. I don't have an answer off the top of my head for you, unfortunately, Marshall, on what media out there will do it. In fact, I'll make that part of my tests for you for the 6K Pro when it arrives. I'll try and get some of the fastest media we can and see what we can do in camera with it. Costanti says, do you think the FX3 will have an SDI output? We don't know. We need to see what Sony announced tomorrow. The way that these things work is, either I haven't been told anything from Sony, in which case I'm in the exact same position as all of you are, or we have been disclosed to, in which case I'm under an NDA and I'm not allowed to talk to you about it. So unfortunately, I can't answer any specific questions like that. What I can tell you, though, is that on the leaked stuff, I didn't see anything that said that it had an SDI output. They have some pictures up there, and it doesn't look like there's a connector. for any SDI outputs. So it's looking like it might not, but like I said earlier, I'm sure some of what's up there is true and some of it isn't true. So who knows? Right, people talking about the EVFs. We need to see those in all sorts of cameras. Okay, Andreas, do you think the Pocket 6K Pro is a little smaller in width than the normal Pocket? It would fit better on the Ronin S. I don't think it does. I don't think it is on a little wider, or a little less wide, or a little narrower. Presumably you mean wide width that way, so along the screen at the back, rather than sort of depth, if you like. It looked like it was about the same. In fact, I think they put measurements on their website. Let's have a little look. So if I go to their website, here we go. They have, oh, I went the wrong way through those banners. There's the 6K Pro. On here they have the tech specs where they show you the dimensions, I believe. Or is it just the buttons? I thought this. Here we go. So 180 millimeters wide on the 6K and 178 millimeters wide on the normal 6K. So actually the Pro is ever so slightly wider. Yeah, Marshall is actually saying there. It's about 2 millimeters wider and deeper and 18 millimeters taller to accommodate the EVF. So yeah, it will be pretty much the same ergonomics for fitting onto gimbals or anything else like that. They do work, they do fit onto gimbals, particularly the new RS2 and the RSC2. However, they will never work particularly well because of this wide design that they've gone for. Okay, Shem is saying he's still searching for trousers with a pocket big enough to fit the Pocket 6K or 4K. Any recommendations? Big cargo pants, you know, the really big sort of ones with about 50 pockets on them. They should have pockets big enough. But yeah, most normal pockets, you're not going to fit it in your Levi jeans, are you? Okay. Okay, Camille is asking, do you think the buttons for the Blackmagic camera on the Extreme will be available for other camera brands? So that's the camera control functions to let you control iris and all the rest of it. So probably not, because it works over HDMI, which is something I've never seen on any other camera product, and I don't know how Blackmagic do it. But they actually send you some camera disclosure information, so some camera control information back over HDMI, so you don't need a separate, LANC controller cable or Ethernet cable or anything like that in order to send control data back to the camera. And the only cameras that will really work with are their micro cinema and studio cameras or their pocket cameras. And so I don't think we will ever see that on other brands. So, Canon cameras, Sony cameras, Pana cameras, anything like that. I think it's very unlikely we will see that come to it. What I would hope maybe is some sort of Blackmagic breakout box, which lets you use more traditional RS422, LANC controllers or anything like that to plug into cameras, because then any cameras which have that sort of protocol, you could take 2 cables out of each one and put them into the breakout box, which then connects to something like the A10 Mini over HDMI and splits the signal. I wonder if that would be possible, but I doubt we will see it actually natively in camera brands anytime soon. Okay, Tomek, greetings from Poland. Thank you for joining us from Poland. Thanks for all the videos. That's no problem at all. Thank you for watching them. So you have to buy budget wireless mic systems. Looking at either the Lark 150 from Hollyland or the Saramonic Blink 500 Pro, kind of the same, inside interviews, live streams, etc. I played with the Blink very quickly, and I've got much more experience with the Lark 150. I much prefer the design of the Lark 150, to be quite honest with you. I love its charging case. It's limited, sure. You don't have any way to charge it without putting it back in the charging case, which is probably its main limitation. Plus, it's not got the best signal out of it in the world in terms of levels, and so it can be a bit fussy with some microphones that are a bit quieter, for example. But combine it with the right lav mics and use it for sort of simple, quick-fire applications. I think it's a brilliant, brilliant product. I really like it. To me, either go for the Rode Wireless Go's or the Lark 150s, or go for higher end systems like the Sennheiser AVX, things like that would be my recommendation. I'd also chuck into the thing, thinking about it, the Sennheiser ones, which have been out for a while, but people don't shout about anywhere near as much, which is the Sennheiser XSWD. Now, I think the reason that the XSWD doesn't get talked about quite as much as some of the others is because of its slightly higher price point, because it's made by Sennheiser. XSWD, but I don't see people talking about these quite as much, and they are very good indeed. So this is the lavalier set, so this would plug into a XLR based. The other thing I think why people don't talk about them quite so much is because they find the lineup a little bit confusing, because they've got so many different options, because this is used for all sorts of different things. But the reason I really like this system, so this would be the direct equivalent of, say, a Rode Wireless Go or a Filmmaker Link, or the Lark 150 if it was just a single channel system. So transmitter and receiver, lav mic into one, 3.5mm cable like this one here on the right, out into a camera. Fine. But you can also get this one, the normal lavalier set, which is a lav mic going into one, but then an XLR on the other end. So you can plug that directly into an XLR camera. And then they make a whole bunch of other ones. So they have an XLR 1 to XLR, for example. They have so many different options for this. Yeah, there's this one, the portable bass kit, which lets you... no, this one doesn't. That one's the one without a 3.5mm jack, without a lav mic in it, for you using your own lav mic. There's so many ones. There's ones which are XLRs, so you can just go XLR to XLR, but without phantom power. They're quite a good comprehensive lineup, so they could meet your requirements as well. Marshall saying Curtis Judd did a Lark and Blink comparison this last weekend. I haven't seen that. What were his thoughts while we're live? I will go back and watch that though, because I'm curious to see what Curtis's opinion is of them. But yeah, the main reason, I imagine he'd be focusing on the quality of them. The main reason I like the Lark is because of the usability of it. To be honest, if I care about quality, I'm going to be spending that a little bit more and going for something like a AVX system, because although it is significantly more expensive, it's like 3 times the price, we're still not talking about that much money in terms of video creation, in terms of cameras, lenses, all the rest of it. Don't scrimp on your audio unless it makes sense for you to just use a more affordable run and gun, type solution. If you want good quality audio, shell out a little bit and go for good quality audio, is my opinion. Okay, let's see. So Chris Foot is saying, any thoughts on the Canon HF G60 or XA versus the XA50, primarily for use for live streaming in a church building? Cameras need to be approximately 15 meters away from the front. To be quite honest with you, I can't remember what the difference is. Do we even have the G60 on our site? We do. There we go. So the G60 will be the non-XLR version of one of their XA line. So the XA, which one was it? The 50 that you wanted. So the XA50 is their 1-inch sensor, whereas this one, let's just figure out what size sensor this is, 1 inch. So yeah, this is the same camera. So it's the same camera, the same lens, the same sensor, just missing this top unit for XLRs. Plus the XA50, no, the XA50 will just have HDMI output. It won't have SDI output. That'd be a 55. Yeah, SDI output with a XA55 only. The 55 might be the one you want for live streaming because it has SDI. If you're just using HDMI though, I would go for the XA50 over the G60 because of the XLR inputs. That means that it's much more flexible tool for you to use in any way you need to. But in terms of, you talk about 15 meters away from the front, they're going to have the same lens system on them. Let me just check that. It's 15 times optical, which is 25 to 368, and this is 15 times optical, 25 to 382. Yep, it is the same lens system, the same camera system. Basically, it's just that top handle that is different on the cameras. So you just need to figure out if you want that. My advice would be yes, but you just need to figure out whether you need that for your work or not. Okay, Matt points out for Chris, having zoom control on a tripod handle is very helpful in churches. Ensures a connection on camera. Yep, couldn't agree more. Having lank zoom control would be worthwhile. Okay. Looking at LANC controllers, Chris has come back. Let me show you just very quickly before we move on what LANC controllers. There is a very zoom. Here we go. I think it's just this one which just uses the normal. Nope, that's the one that uses the big controller. This one. So this is the RL100 from VariZoom. Very simple little £70 LANC controller. Goes onto your pan bar like that and plugs into the camera over a 2.5mm jack. Gives you a record button and a zoom button. Very useful. Very useful indeed. Okay, Taz Underwood. I still can't decide between an FX6, C70 or the 6K Pocket Pro. Which would you choose, Carl? Ooh, it is a tough decision. They are all pretty fantastic cameras. The first thing I'd say to that is it doesn't matter what I would choose. The right camera for me and my work is not the right camera for you and your work unless we happen to do exactly the same sort of projects and work in exactly the same sort of way, which I almost guarantee we wouldn't. Everyone is different, so we need to figure out what the right camera for you, not the right camera for me. The main differences between them, the Pocket 6K Pro is very different to the others. So the Pocket 6K Pro is all about image quality in a smaller form factor as possible. If you want the maximum amount of image quality for the minimum amount of budget, and you want to work in a more crafted cinematic sort of way where you're more in control of the subject that you're filming, the Pocket 6K Pro is going to be a fantastic camera. If you're having to walk that line between some of the time you're crafting and some of the time you're just having to film what's in front of you and document a bit more. So corporate is a very classic example of that, where some of the time are going to be carefully crafting it and doing a nicely lit interview, for example. And some of the time you're going to need to get B-roll on the factory floor, things like that. If you're doing that sort of work, or you're doing events is a very classic one where face tracking autofocus is just unbelievable, for example. FX6 or C70 will be much more suitable cameras because of the autofocus and the more video ergonomics. The strengths and weaknesses of each particular one. The C70 is very good for image quality. I love the image out of the C70. That dual gain output sensor that's on the C300 Mark III as well, I think is one of the nicest sensors on the market right now. Taz come back saying short dock and corporate have an FS5 and quite a few EF lenses. So if you have EF lenses, if they're full frame EF lenses, you might want to look at the C70, because with the adapters on that, you're going to get full autofocus control. Whereas with the FX6, you're not. You'll be more familiar with the camera because you've got an FS5, but you won't get autofocus. And with these cameras, I really recommend people actually use the autofocus because it is just fantastic. The FX6 is a much more well-rounded camera, if you like. It's probably on paper a better camera. It has the codecs is the main reason I say that, plus the variable ND system. The variable ND system is fantastic. I mean, the C70 has NDs and it has more than enough NDs to get you through. Don't feel that you're compromising with the C70's NDs in any way, shape or form. They're brilliant. However, the variable ND system that Sony has is brilliant, and it gives you really fine control so that you can just set your aperture to what you want and then control your exposure while outside as the sun goes in and out or whatever with your variable aperture. It's brilliant. Plus, added to that, the codecs, so you get 10-bit all-eye codecs in all frame rates up to 4K 120. So the C70 will do 4K all-eye 10-bit, but only at real-time frame rates. If you go to slow motion, it goes to long up. Not the end of the world at all, particularly if you've got a decent computer, but technically the FX6 is more capable in terms of codec point of views. It does though cost more, and it's a very different form factor. It's a much bigger form factor, and it's a form factor very similar to the FS5's form factor. C70 is almost this hybrid cross between DSLR form factor and that form factor of the FS5 and the FX6. So ergonomically, they're actually quite different to use. They are very closely matched cameras. In terms of which ones I'd choose, I mean, it's hard to... I could very much see myself picking either one of them, to be quite honest. I think I lean slightly more towards the C70 simply because the autofocus is easier to control with its touchscreen, and I really love the image, and so I think the sort of compromises with the codecs is worth it for me. However, the FX6 is a very sensible choice. It does cost more money, but that codecs in every single option out there, it is going to be very, very capable. Plus the low light on the FX6 is just fantastic. So for a lot of people, it is so close that it does come down to their glass, and that's what I can see people recommending down there. The difference is the glass. John68Z says Sony is depending on you using their glass. That is true. However, they're on E-mount glass, not just Sony glass. So, for example, there are a whole bunch of very good third-party lenses for E-mount now, which autofocus very quickly, which we're actually looking at very soon on the channel. There is the Big Sigma primes, with the art lenses, which have been out for a long time. They're brilliant, and they have a 70-200 as well, which is fantastic. There's the Zeiss Batis primes, which are beautiful primes. And then there's these ones, which are the new Sigma I series. So these are their contemporary lineup rather than their art lineup. And these are full frame prime lenses with full autofocus, and they're tiny, and they're only about sort of, I think they're about £500 each. Let me just look it up. If I type I series, will they come up? No, they won't. How about if I search it? Trouble is that it's not in the product name, so they often don't get found. Tell you what, if I go to lenses and go to E-mount, this shows you some of the options that I'm talking about here. Right. So there's obviously the Sony ones. These are the Zeiss Batis lenses here in this middle round, and then in the middle there we've got the Sigma 24-70 f2.81 that I was talking about. And then these are the I series lenses, which are just fantastic value for money. You know, look at that. That's £400 ex-VAT, 480 ink VAT for a 24mm prime with full autofocus, manual iris ring. I've been really impressed with these things, and they're so small as well. Oh, where's my mount's gone? There they are. There's a 35mm, there's a 45mm, and a 65mm. This 65 in particular, for just a lens to chuck into your kit bag for autofocus in interviews, for interview close-up, for example. What a brilliant lens. I mean, 650 quid for that. It's really small. It's only 400 grams, so it takes up no space at all in a camera bag. Full frame, manual iris ring. You know, these are really good value for money little lenses. Oh, there's the entire line up there. So yeah, really recommend those, and we've got a video coming out on those at some point soon. Thanks for the detailed answer. No problem. That's what the stream's for. Okay. Eugene says FX6 better for EFP situations. EFP? What do you mean by EFP, Eugene? That was a phrase I'm not familiar with. do you mean by EFP? C70 better for audio, stripped down for better run and gun. Otherwise, they're both great for most things. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about really good cameras here. Whether you go for this Pocket 6K Pro, the C70, this FX6, the A7S Mark III, the R5, FX9, C300 Mark III. We've got such good cameras to choose from at the moment. If you rewind a year and look at what the camera market was like before COVID came out and then shut us all down into lockdown across the world and ruined industries up and down the country and the world, our camera situation was very different to what we're in now. As the industry gets going again out of lockdown, we're really going to see some interesting times in terms of camera technology out there. Oh, electronic field production. Okay, I see what you mean. So yeah, sort of more on the run, on the go, sort of TV production, that sort of thing. Okay, Shem is saying FX6 is more versatile. SDI and HDMI out at the same time is great for live production together with Cinetone. Yes, completely agree. Although Cinetone, Canon have had their version of Cinetone WideDR for a long time, which I would say is just as good as Cinetone. I think WideDR is a brilliant codec. Cinetone maybe Cinetone's a bit better actually. It holds slightly more information in the highlights, but you're splitting apples and pears there. Canon have had a very good what you see is what you get Rec 709 profile for a long time. Eugene says, I can tell you're a new school, Carl. I am. I'm young. Sorry. I talk to a lot of customers with lots more experience than I do, though, and I haven't heard that E&G, electronic news gathering. I hear that term all the time. But no, I don't hear EFP as a production. Where are you from, Eugene? Are you UK? Is that a UK term, or is that European or further afield? I'd be very interested to know if you're in the UK, because I just haven't heard that acronym at all. Okay, John 69 is saying ND can and will color shift depending on the glass. Every manufacturer's glass is different. Interesting. ND should change on the sensor, very much so. But I wouldn't necessarily say it changes ND because of the glass. What ND might do, though, is as IR pollution, if the camera's not great at cutting out IR pollution, it might change some of the characteristics of the glass that way. If the coating of the lenses doesn't let through as much IR or lets through more IR. But for the most part, different amounts of ND levels shouldn't affect, as far as I'm aware, what a glass looks like. However, it will massively change on the sensor whether it's got IR cut in it or not. Magenta or green glass. Interesting. I'll do some tests on that, but see if I can investigate a little bit for that. Eugene says you're a Brit that now lives in Sweden working in live broadcast. Oh, interesting. Maybe it's a European thing. Video editor bloke says he hasn't heard of EFP before either. I mean, there's so many different terms for different things in this industry. There really is. Okay, Philip says I've missed your question. 1630. That is so useful, putting the timestamp. Thank you so much for that. 1634. Let's see if I can find you. I found you. Thank you for the timestamp. Wish everyone did that. Upgrading my 2-camera setup. Currently A7 III and A6400. You want both 10-bit, ability to share lenses, and one that can do stills. Can you think of a better pair than a Blackmagic Pocket 6K and an S5 using EF to L mount? Ooh. Okay. I mean, if you want ones that can share lenses, why are you looking at 2 different manufacturers would be my first port of call. If you really want the Blackmagic, that might be why. If you do really want the Blackmagic, you're going to struggle with finding one that matches it in terms of image quality and color reproduction, because all of Canon, Sony and Panasonic have quite different color reproduction. All of them will, especially now that Sony have improved some of their color science with their latest cameras, all of them will match fairly well to the Pocket. I think off the top of my head, the ones that would probably match the best is Canon with its saturation dialed back. But maybe I don't know what I'm grounding. That's just a gut reaction. I might be wrong there. What I would look at is the same manufacturer. So for Panasonic, for example, considering you mentioned the S5, you could go the S5 and then a larger one, so an S1H, for example. And then you've got a small camera and a bigger camera. If you go Sony, I mean, it's hard to ignore the A7S Mark III. That is just a fantastic camera. I guess budget, I mean, those are two slightly lower priced budget options, the S5 and the Pocket. So maybe budget would limit you from going to A7S Mark IIIs, for example. Difficult, yeah. Let me know a bit more information. I'll just scroll through and see if I can see any more of your comments to see if you've left any more information there. Don't think you have. Two Sony tempered cameras is well outside the budget. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're looking at a good option there with the Pocket 6K and the S5. I mean, the S5 is a brilliant little stills camera and shoots very good video as well. So as a video camera and a stills camera, I am a big believer that for people doing sort of corporate, trying to be able to answer whatever a customer might ask of them type work, you've got to remember different people do different sorts of work. And so if you're the sort of person that regularly makes all of their income from repeat customers, where it's very predictable the style of work you're doing, or it's niche, so say you do weddings, for example, and that's how you make your income, or we do some customers that do behind the scenes work for films, for example, and that's how you make your living, is doing behind the scenes work for films, and so you just need a tool that can do that job as well as possible. Great, you can choose the right camera for that job and know that it'll be the right camera for you. If you do sort of the corporate production company, whatever your customer might ask of you, you need to be able to say yes. So one day that might be product stills, the next day that might be a really glossy promotional commercial film for TVs or for their front page of their website. The next it might be a simple corporate video, so L&D style training videos, or it might be recording a conference or live streaming something. You just need to be able to say yes to whatever. I'm a big believer that you should go for two cameras, one that is a hybrid camera and one that is a video camera. So for some people that's a camcorder and a mirrorless camera like this. For some people that's a mirrorless camera and a cinema camera like an A7S Mark III and FX6 to be a classic example. Nowadays, or in the Canon world, you could go for a C70 and a R6 or an R5. But going for two tools rather than one tool to do the right job is a fantastic way of doing it. Try working with about 4K, 5K max budget for bodies. Get in touch with our sales team, Philip, and we'll be able to really price up and give you some quotes, see what we can make fit into your budget. If you mention to anyone in the sales team that you were talking to me in a live stream, they'll loop me into the conversation and we can actually have a proper chat. We can go through, we can find a package for you to fit that budget and make sure that that works for you. We can squeeze in glass and audio or whatever else you need to squeeze into that, because obviously it's quite a personal sort of thing, finding the right cameras for you. So rather than doing it in a live stream, let's transfer that over to an actual conversation where we can go through it in more detail. But as a broader advice, I think that would be my advice. Okay. Tony is saying, are the 6 stops of ND filter in the Pocket 6K Pro enough? The C70 comes in with 10 stops of ND filter. You're right. They are probably not the bare minimum. We've seen some cameras come along with only one stop of, one level, not one stop, but one level. So say 4 stops of ND, and that's all you get is one size fits all ND filters. And that is great. It's better than no filters. The way that these work is that they've got 2 filter trays, and then they've got the C70's got bigger filter trays in it, so that you can get different levels go down, so you get more stops in between. So it's not just about the max, it's also about having more stages in between, Whereas the Blackmagic, I believe, does have 2 filter trays, but with only 1 filter in each, and that's how they've got it in such a small camera. So the way it works is 1 for 2 will come down, 1 for 4 will come down, and then combine them for 6. That's the way it'll work. So because of that, I think that's how they've managed to keep the cost down. Remember, that's a big consideration with these pocket cameras, is meaning that they don't end up costing very much money, because that's really what defines a pocket camera. And yet giving you built-in NDs in such a small body. What Canon have been able to do with their ND system on the C70 does really need a bit of a shout out, because that is a very complicated and advanced ND system that they've managed to fit in there with lots of different levels, and they've managed to squeeze it into a much smaller body, and they've managed to get it behind an RF mount, which is really, really impressive. And the way that Sony have always been able to do this is with their electronic ND system, which explains that. But Canon are doing that with a more traditional system. I do prefer Sony's electronic system, the variable system, but simply the engineering feat that Canon have done of managing to squeeze that traditional drop-down stage-based ND system, one that's capable of a maximum of 10 stops with a decent amount of settings in between, is really quite remarkable that they've been able to do that. John is saying, what's the weakest feature of the C70? That's a really good question. What's the weakest feature? Probably its codecs. So they've given you really good frame rates, and they've given you really good codecs in there, but they've limited the all-eye to only being up to 30 frames a second. If you need to go any higher than that, you have to swap over to long op, which means that if you're jumping in and out of slow motion, you're ending up with a batch of files, and half of which are all-eye and half of which are long op, which really is a struggle on your computer to do. So for that sort of situation, I do recommend people transcode the long op. And so that's probably the weakest feature of the C70, in my opinion. But complaining about that as the weakest feature seems really spoiled, to be quite honest with you. Dan's just said I've missed an XF705 question earlier. Let me go back and try and find it. Oh, he's going to find it for me. Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Eugene is saying, talking about EFP still. From Wikipedia, EFP is a television industry term referring to a video production which takes place in the field outside of a formal television studio in a practical location or special venue. I mean, that is 95% of production that's done nowadays, Eugene. I think it's a term that has gone out of style as more and more people have done that. Video editor bloke is saying, having started in news, I've always just called that kind of production ENG, but EFP does make more sense. Yep. ENG is ENG. That's news gathering. That's a very different thing. That is journalism. EFP sounds like it's a much more broad term. So, you know, right now it's a studio, if you like, but if we go do a video for the channel outside on the field, that would be EFP, I guess. It's a good term. I guess it's gone out of fashion because everything's electronic nowadays. Okay, Cameron is the one that asked the XF705 question. What are your thoughts on the Canon XF705 in 2021? I'm filming an adventure travel documentary and like the idea of not changing lenses in the field. So I think the Canon XF705 is a fantastic camera. I think it was crippled when it was released because it relied so heavily on an H.265 or HEVC codec, which is quite hard for computers to play back. And at the time, we just didn't really have the computers that were capable of playing it back. Even if you bought a full maxed out Mac Pro system at the time, it was going to struggle to play back those footage. So really people needed to transcode, and that transcoding process, because it was difficult for computers to manage, would take a long time. Now, though, we're starting to see graphics cards for Windows, and we're seeing the new chip for Macs, so the M1 chip, be able to handle H.265 much better. So for H.265 in particular, the M1 chip has just made incredible leaps forward in terms of editing H.265 footage. So if you're buying an XF705, I think it's almost a must buy to buy one of the new Mac M1 computers alongside it. If you're really Windows, there will be some graphics cards out there, I can't remember them off the top of my head, that will work for you, but it's much more complex and you'll have to dive into specs a lot more. For on the Mac side of things, you can pretty much walk into an Apple store and buy any of the M1 computers, whether that's a MacBook Air, a MacBook Pro, or a Mac Mini. Although I'd probably go with the Mac Mini would be my recommendation. Although if you're doing travel, maybe the MacBook Pro. Or wait and see if they're going to announce any 15-inch MacBook Pros this year with it in, because they might be even better suited. But yeah, with one of those computers, to better handle the H.265 footage that comes from the XF705, I think the XF705 makes so much more sense now as a camera. I still think it's priced a little high. I think Canon have put it at quite a high price point. Let's find it on the channel, on the website, sorry. XF705. Actually, it's come down a little bit in price since I last looked at it, so it makes a bit more sense, but even so, it's more priced than some of the other ones out there. But it's got by far the nicest image quality of any of these camcorders that I've used. Anything from Sony, anything from Panasonic, I think this is the best of the bunch, and that's why it's priced like it is. And it does 4K 50p in 10-bit 422 because of that XAVC codec. So yes, that XFAVC, that HS one, sorry, what am I saying? It's not the HS. I'm getting confused with Sony's codecs. The XFHEVC, those are the letters I'm searching for. Because of that codec, which uses 8.265, yes, they're a pain to work with, but they are remarkably good quality, and it managed to do that quality in what are relatively small file sizes. If we look at what the actual data rates are, do they actually publish them? Here in the text specs, this is very interesting viewing, isn't it? But yeah, look at this. On a 128 gigabyte card, you're going to be able to get at the highest record quality, so 160 megabits a second, which is really quite small. You're going to get 105 minutes, which is remarkable in terms of this kind of quality. And that's 210 minutes if you go up to 256 gigabyte card. And it won't need to be a particularly fast card either. It can be a V60 rather than a V90 at those kind of data rates. So for travel documentaries, it'll be a brilliant camera. But get a computer like those M1 Macs that's going to be able to deal with it. Right, we're nearing the end of our time limit, so let me just go. Okay. Right, John, I guess on the C70s, you're coming back on this. I think that the RF mount is not a feature during the rollout. One of the first things Canon Rep said was to buy the EF mount to use the camera, making the RF mount at zero added value. I completely agree that it's confusing as to whether or not you should go for EF or RF with these cameras. However, as we transition into the future, RF is going to make a lot more sense. And the RF lenses, when paired with the C70, are beautiful. And it is fantastic to see a manufacturer putting the lens communication data in there for two styles of lenses, the traditional lenses and the new mirrorless lenses. So the C70 is pretty much, and the R5, I suppose, are pretty much the only cameras I can think of on the market where you can use new breed of mirrorless camera lenses, like you can on Sony's E-mount or like a L-mount and Panasonic L-mount or whatever, and have just as good an experience as you can with a longer flange distance, more traditional lens like EF. That is pretty much the only camera on the market where you can change interchangeably between them with one of their built-in adapters and get very good performance without any drop-off in compromise. Obviously, each different lens behaves differently, so some RF lenses will outperform the best EF lenses. That is different. But from a camera point of view, the camera doesn't care whether it's got an RF lens or an EF lens attached to it with an adapter. It understands both perfectly. It has the language, if you like. It speaks both languages fluently. So rather than having to convert anything, it is built on the camera. So I do think the RF, I would disagree with you there a little bit and say that the RF mount is very definitely a strong feature, because I think it is great to be able to have that choice. But I do see your point that deciding now whether or not to choose between RF or EF is very confusing. And I think the messaging from Canon on that has been very confusing, perhaps on purpose, but it has been very confusing. You know, what do they want us to buy? RF lenses or EF lenses? It's quite difficult to understand what's going on there. But yeah, I think that wrapped it up nicely. So let's leave it there. If you want to buy any of the products that we've been talking about here, or any of those new Blackmagic products, let us know, because the list for these new Blackmagic products is growing massively. The Pocket 6K Pro and all of its accessories should be shipping very soon. We've put 2 to 4 weeks now on the website simply because we're having so many orders come in and we're not sure on the allocation just yet to know how many we're going to have, so how quickly those orders are going to get fulfilled. But they are in stock. The first batches of those will be shipping out very, very soon. They're in stock with Blackmagic, not in stock with us, I should say. So the Pocket and accessories bits should be in customers' hands very quickly. The ATEM Mini Pro Extreme should be in customers' hands very quickly. The Extreme ISO and the Web Presenter are a couple of weeks behind, but again, not too far off. So all of those, absolutely get in touch. I've just seen a question there from John. Remember the Atmos 5 and the future upgrades, where are the NDI converters? Couldn't agree more, John. Let's get one of those little Atom X modules for the back of the Ninja 5 to turn it into an NDI converter. That would be fantastic. I'd love to see them partnering with somebody like Bird Dog, for example, to put a Bird Dog Flex into one of those little things. You already can do it a little bit with the Bird Dog Flexes, but that is a brilliant idea. I would love to see that on a Ninja 5. But that was a good question right at the end, and it's distracted me, John. I was nearly done my sign off. So yeah, if you want to buy any of those, they get in touch with the sales team, and shipping for those new products shouldn't be too far away. And if you've got pre-orders already outstanding for a bunch of the other exciting products that we've talked about, so the FX6, C70, we're seeing very healthy shipments. I think large shipments of both of those are due in this week, so we're seeing good movement on stock on those ones as well. So if you are waiting from us, you shouldn't be waiting too much longer. And if you've already bought one from us and received it, let me know what you think of it. And if you haven't bought one yet, get in touch. Thank you so much for watching these, and thank you so much for all your questions. It's great to see so many of you chiming in for these and leaving such a good amount of questions for some good conversation backwards and forwards. It's a fantastic way for me to gauge what you guys are out there thinking, and I look forward to seeing what you all think of the announcements that are going to come from Sony tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you very soon.